All right, take a seat. Come up to the front. There's a lot of room here in the front. We're going to kick off the next panel. This is Industrial IoT, the big opportunity. So please come in. There's a lot of open seats up in front. Couple of housekeeping things to point out. If you have any questions for the panelists, you can go to mHUB.cnf.io to submit a question. And then we'll have a queue of questions that the panelists can answer. Also, the hashtag of the day is mHUB 1 year celebration. So please give a shout out on social media for the 1 year celebration. So what is IoT? So this panel is about industrial IoT. mHUB is very well positioned to support this industry with the electronics lab that we have, with the mentorship that we have. I want to give you an example of one of our member companies here, Amper, and introduce you to Akshat Tharani, who's going to talk about his company and tell you what it's about.
Thanks. Hi there. My name is Akshat, and I'm co-founder and CEO of Amper. We're one of the teams over here at mHUB and have an office inside at the very end of the office block. And I thought I'd share a little bit about what we do. So just for background, I grew up in a manufacturing family and grew up going to factory floors and was always really passionate about how things are made, essentially. And as I went to college, studied computer science along with manufacturing, and it's kind of sad to see the difference in technology available to most manufacturers. Like a typical factory would have technology maybe a decade or 2 decades behind that what you get in computer science. And bunch of pilots, and start again. Yeah, so anyway, our goal is to make it simple to track what's going on in a factory. In factories, you typically don't have the right capabilities to get a lot of software on, so we've tried to consumerize our products as far as possible. It's a retrofit installation, and can be adopted in 30 minutes. So trying to lower the bar for getting information off a factory floor. Typically, most manufacturers have to use really heavyweight Siemens or PLC integration-based systems, and our goal has been to make it more accessible. Anyway, we've been using mHUB for the last 5 months, and Have loved it, right from prototyping using the 3D printers to electronics fabrication. We've also been lucky to get introduced to a lot of manufacturers and get really great advisors. So excited to be here, and hope you enjoyed the rest of the panel. Thanks.
Thank you, Akshat. I would like to introduce Claire Bushey. She's a reporter at Crain, Chicago. She covers a lot of manufacturing. Welcome. And for the panelists, I'd like to introduce Jeff Garcias from Marmon. He's the Chief Innovation Officer at Marmon Holding. We have Sonny Garg, who's a global lead for energy solutions at Uptake. Welcome. And David Mack, the Vice President of Business Development at Panduit.
Thank you for coming to Industrial IoT, the big opportunity. We're going to talk about how companies are using digital technology to connect, monitor, harvest data from, and analyze that data from their physical assets, and even from their workforce, in order to operate more efficiently and more safely. And it's important because the size of the opportunity is stunning. A 2015 report from the World Economic Forum found that over the next decade, the industrial internet has the potential to alter manufacturing, energy, transportation, agriculture, other industrial sectors, all of which add up to 2/3 of global GDP. So there is a lot of money to be made here, and really the only question is who is going to make it and how they're going to do it. And so to answer some of those questions, we have our panelists. And just to start with, can you tell us a little bit more about how the industrial internet can reduce waste and inefficiency, and whether or not that varies across different sectors?
So, Marmon is a very diversified company. And because of that, we see the application of IoT happening in a lot of different ways. We are definitely seeing some waste reduction. One of the biggest applications we have right now is we've actually put IoT-enabled sensors into some of our customers that help us monitor their inventory levels so we can automatically replenish them. When we've done that, we've also integrated from an electronic payment processing standpoint. So we've eliminated the need for purchase orders, for invoices, for tracking and notification. It's all done automatically. So we're seeing a big boost in productivity, and also, more importantly for us, much happier customers. They don't have to worry about running out of stock. They trust us to manage that for them. So that's sort of in the distribution side of things. In the manufacturing side of things, we've connected some of our devices so that we can monitor them from afar. That allows us to do a better job of maintaining them. And sometimes, we know if we're sending someone out on an emergency service call, they can go and hit some of the machines nearby that have preventative maintenance coming up in cycle while they're there, so that they can avoid some trip time, which has helped boost our efficiency as well.
You want me to?
What are some of the cybersecurity risks that come with having all your machinery connected to a larger network? And what are some of the things that can be done to protect against that?
So one of the things, we talked on the phone, we kind of joked that no CEO wakes up in the morning and wants to connect everything in their factory to the network. Mm-hmm. You can hardly imagine how the IT department feels about that, about putting all that stuff onto the network. So definitely a concern. And you hear about, you talked a little bit about smart supply chain. And as the things that are in the supply chain get smarter, you have to be careful also on what's coming in to your factory and into, into your operation, because those things can now have viruses in them that you don't know are there, and then once they come in, that's not your typical way that you think you would get something like that, but that's how things like that can come in. I was reading recently about this whole notion of all these things that are on the factory floor that are now connected to the Ethernet. And what happens is, like I said, these devices can have things in them that are vulnerabilities to the network. And so one of the things that companies, like best practice is the way you set up the architecture of your network is one thing, and then you want to put a DMZ between your OT and your IT so that stuff can't get in either direction, I guess, is really some of the things that are happening today.
I would just add that I think it's a huge problem, right? Any device that you connect is a new point of vulnerability that somebody can hack in. And so they've got to really figure out, how are you going to be able to protect against that? And just, I like to say that there's sort of like an Alan Greenspan irrational exuberance with connecting stuff, And I think you've got to be really careful, because to the degree it's connected to your corporate network or connected to your control systems, you've got to be really careful with regard to the cyber piece. And a lot of the initial software that's coming out isn't necessarily focused on preventing cyber attacks and isn't really designed to meet certain ISO standards. So I think as people think about that in the context of their manufacturing plans, they should be thinking about the cyber piece, and is that coming with the software or not?
You mentioned, Dave, a little bit of tension between IT and operational technology. What's the source of that tension, and what can companies do to manage it so that you can actually accomplish the project?
It's not a little tension, it's a lot of tension, yeah. So the reason why is the goals of those two organizations are very different. And so, the cost of downtime, so Sonny and I were just talking about this before we stepped up here, the cost of downtime, if someone can't send an email for 5 minutes, is maybe not so high, or the ramifications of that. But if you're in a pharmaceutical environment and you have downtime and you have to dump a whole batch of something, that could cost a lot of money. And so, plus the downtime itself, you're rolling off X dollars per minute off of a production line. So the goals, I would say, being very different. And the security issues on either side are very different as well. So it's really, how do I manage the IT side of things versus how do I manage the OT side of things? And those approaches, goals, and views can be very different. And the accountabilities can be very different as well.
So what do you do about it?
So I'll answer. I mean, as a former CIO of a big company, I would say that, I wouldn't leave it to the IT folks. I mean, sorry, IT people. I'm sorry. Only because if you really want to make it work in I think across industries, right? It's got to be driven by a business case, right? And a lot of people think of IT as being a cost center. It's like, so my budget at Exelon used to be $1 billion, and the CEO would be like, what do I get for $1 billion? And I'd be like, I'll see you next week, right? I mean, it's really hard to quantify versus OT. When you invest in OT, it should see some kind of economic benefit. So you've got to have that mindset, an operational mindset, as you're thinking about IoT that is tied to value creation. If there isn't a business case, don't spend the money. Everybody's like, censor this, censor that, do this. You're like, okay, well, how am I going to make more money, become more productive, or increase safety? And if you can't answer that question, don't spend the money. And that's traditionally not how IT is thought about it. The other thing I would say is I think there's just a huge difference between what historically has been IT and sort of infrastructure and ERPs and what we're talking. Data science, digital, this is not your father's Oldsmobile. This is not traditional IT. This is totally a different, this is like asking your car, and this is going to, again, no offense to IT people. I was an IT guy. It's like asking your car mechanic to design an electric vehicle. It's that different. It's a different world.
So just one quick additional point, and that
Just
is...
disagree with me.
No,
Make
no,
me friends.
I'm not an IT person. So I'm good.
You're an OT guy.
That's right. So what we're seeing as a trend is that the level of sophistication and IT skills within the OT group is coming up to, they're raising the bar on that. And because if you think about it, maybe 10, 20 years ago, a lot of those guys knew how to program things like PLCs, and there weren't, the Ethernet was not on the plant floor that many years ago. So, so now, and it's easier to train that into folks who understand, to Sonny's point, that know the specifics of what you're trying to do in the OT environment and train them up on the IT skills. It's very difficult to take someone from an IT environment and then put them into the OT environment and expect that to go well. So it's not symmetric.
Interesting. Did you have something?
I was going to make that exact point that my experience has been it is people coming from the manufacturing side of the business or the engineering side of the business pulling IT tools to make IoT happen rather than IT coming in to drive any of that forward.
That's very interesting. Skipping, so once you have connected your shop floor and you are pulling information from your machinery, what investments do you need to have in order to actually analyze it in an effective manner, so you can get something out of all these insights that you are harvesting?
Well, I would actually argue that, to the point that you just made, you have to have all that figured out before you spend any money and put anything in place. Our experience has, again, been the most challenging part is collecting the information, the sensor side of thing. The easiest part is the linking all of it together, and then somewhat in between is the analysis and decision-making of what it is you're going to do differently. But you have to look at all three of those, because one without the other two is really kind of worthless, and so we probably wouldn't make any investment if we didn't have everything. We kind of actually approached it as building a backbone for communication, and now that we've got that, we're looking for applications of new sensors to give us even more data that we could then use to make more and better decisions to help run the business.
And can I just add, because to your point, you have to, at the end of the day, the data is interesting, and even the data science and the insight's interesting. But unless somebody takes action from it, it doesn't matter, right? So you've got to work backwards from, like, what decision am I trying to change that's going to give me better availability, productivity, reliability, safety, whatever it is, so that even if you are able to collect the data, which sometimes can be hard, normalize it, do the data science, create the insight, how you deliver it back to the person on the shop floor matters. And a lot of, sort of mature industries, folks have been doing this stuff for 20, 30 years. If you think about Moneyball and the book on baseball, right? It was like scouts saying, like, I know what a baseball player looks like. Don't get me some Harvard statistician to tell me what a baseball player looks like. And you're going to get some of that here, that you have to prove out the value before somebody in the field is actually going to do something with the insight.
It's interesting, though, because one of the things that I've been most impressed by is a lot of times the pull for the IoT is coming from, say, a manufacturing engineer saying, hey, if I could only know how hot that brake drum gets, I could do a better job of designing it. And so they're actually, kind of pulling the desire for the data in and then knowing what they're going to do with it once they get it.
Are there examples that spring to mind of receiving pushback, and how did you overcome that?
So, so Uptake, I'm sorry, do you want to go ahead? Go ahead. We work in lots of different industries, right? Rail, mining, construction, energy, and everyone's a little different, and every company's a little different. So if you think about adoption of IoT, there's almost like two dimensions. Dimension one is the sort of the technical dimension, and sophistication. The other one is sort of the cultural dimension and the willingness to sort of change. And so in some areas, you've got people who are like, yeah, I've been waiting for this. And in some areas, you don't. We spend a lot of time at Uptake deploying UI, UX people into the field to actually understand how people do their job so that they actually get bought in and want to use the insight. So if they're not excited about it beforehand, to get them on the ground, to actually sit next to them and help them explain to them, how does this make your life better, right? And to make it very personal for them, that's going to make them be able to do their job better. And that's sort of a different thing than enterprise software, because usually you just deploy enterprise software, you call in change management, they charge you a lot of money, everybody forgets everything after 2 weeks, right? And you can't have that here.
Well, I was going to say for us it's been pretty simple. There's usually resistance, and then we generate incremental revenue and profit, and the resistance goes away.
That's one way to do it.
I would probably only give the long answer to that, but no, I'll say a couple things. So one of the things that we've seen is very similar to that, in that there's a lot of risk. You can't just take a whole enterprise and say we're gonna, like a factory floor, and say that we're gonna convert this whole thing at once. So high risk, high cost. Typically, what we'll see is an outcome. So as Sonny mentioned, some sort of executive level driving function that says there's an operational metric that we need, an efficiency metric or something like that. And then what you'll see is they'll pilot it in part of the plant first, and then prove it out like you were talking about. And then once that's proven out, then it's like more of that. Yeah. And so that's what kind of opens up the doors to really doing it enterprise-wide.
One of the areas where you can see where the industrial internet is being used is in wearables for your workers. For example, devices that can tell you if you are behind a bulldozer that's going to back up, or a device that can tell you whether you are bending at the wrong angle and can lead to repetitive stress injury. And that is actually collecting data on people. Are there any privacy concerns that come up when you are collecting so much information from your employees?
So, one of our first applications of IoT was actually safety vests for our employees who work in rail yards, so that if the locomotive gets too close to them, the locomotive will stop itself and avoid injuries. And I think generally employees like not being hit by the locomotive, but there are some privacy concerns. There are some regulations, particularly in Europe, that you have to pay attention to. You can use the data to find out that someone who's supposed to be off working has gone off and taken a nap someplace. So there are some downsides, but in a lot of ways it's a tool like any other. Video surveillance or key cards that you have to swipe to get in and out. So I think if you use it intelligently and you don't get too carried away with the novelness of the technology, it's really not been too much of a problem to handle.
What needs to happen for the industrial internet to go beyond the Fortune 500s and become mainstream, where it's being used by the mid-sized CNC machine shop in Elk Grove Village?
I think several things are already happening. So the cost curve is coming way down, so that now it's not as expensive to implement, so therefore easier to justify. I believe that these larger companies will set the pace and show what can be done, because there's still a little bit of uncertainty on what can be done with these technologies and predictive maintenance and all these other things we hear about. So as those things become not a question but a fact, then it's a lot easier for these mid-sized companies to do the analysis, and it's a no-brainer. And meanwhile, the cost curve is coming down.
Yeah, I would really agree with that cost curve standpoint. I mean, it's getting much cheaper to put sensors into place and connectivity into place. But I think, I've actually seen probably more small to medium-sized companies be early adopters than large companies. That, a lot of times a large company has sort of a top-down edict, you should go off and do this. And sometimes that works, but a lot of times it doesn't, and they have to scrap it and start all over. Small companies, I think, have, sort of that, natural affinity to sort of play around with some things until they can show some value. And because of that, I think they've been, finding an easier path into this market.
Do we have any numbers that we can actually talk about? Like how much does it cost to outfit, a 75 million in revenue operation? What do you need?
That's a tough question to answer, because it's highly dependent upon what the applications are. You know, we can put in sensors to track SKUs on a shelf now for around $10 to $15 per SKU. And so, you know, it doesn't work well in a place where you have a lot of low value things, but it works really well when you have a few high value items. On the connectivity side, you know, the cost of that is really small. So I mean, we're actually looking at putting sensors on you know, almost disposable items that you can afford to track these days. So I think it's again sort of a hard number to come up with, and it all comes back to that business case, right? You know, if you have a $75 million a year company and you need to spend $7.5 million to put in some capability, you might not do that if it's only saving you $1 million. But if it's saving you $7.5 million a year, all of a sudden you're going to say, hey, why am I'm not doing this already, because it's such a great payback. So again, I think it's always coming back to that business case that you have to look at, balancing the cost and the investment versus the benefits that you're going to receive. That sort of determines how quickly you're going to go.
IIoT will likely be a software as a service business model, but typical industrial clients have large budgets for capital expenditures, not necessarily for software or IT. Do you see this budget changing to accommodate connected products that are subscription-based?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I think, but definitely in the utility industry, it's an issue because you want to capitalize everything, put it in rate base, and earn on it. So the fact that you're going to spend OpEx for a SaaS solution, I think, is actually proven to be a barrier to adoption of more advanced analytics. I think there's movements at state regulatory commissions and around the country to change that. And I think going back to what you said earlier, you know, there's some companies that are just willing to just move forward with it and do something. But definitely in our industry, it's a barrier. I don't think it's going to be there forever, though.
Yeah, I think our experience has been fairly similar, but you know, we've actually, in some cases, sort of repackaged how we offer the IoT service so that it can be part of the capital cost up front, because we've known that's helped get our solution to be the one that's been picked.
Sneaky. Now, at this point, I'd like to talk a little bit about the hype cycle. I'm sure, as many of you in the audience know, the hype cycle kicks off whenever you have a new technology introduced and everyone thinks it's going to save the world. A little bit of time passes, the world is not saved, and then you find yourself in the trough of disillusionment. And you know, and then a little more time passes, and you kind of level out at some level of productivity that is not as high as the peak, but it's not as low as the trough. And so my question to you would be, when it comes to the industrial Internet of Things, where are we in that cycle?
I think we're at the peak. I mean, and again, I don't think it's unusual. I mean, it's, you know, I tend to divide it into two dimensions. Again, one is the technology itself is phenomenal, and it really is going to change the way things are done. What it looks like, we have no idea. It's sort of, and we're still sort of, I joke with our CEO, Brad, that sometimes I feel like we're out there as Netflix in 2007 trying to sell streaming content for a house of cards, and people are like, can you mail me a DVD, right? I mean, they're not ready necessarily, so I think there's a lot of hype about what it can do. I also think the other thing that's going to emerge, and this is what happens in these hype cycles, is you learn. The other dimension is, what's the business model that you can make money doing this, right? So there's a lot of people trying lots of different things to figure out, how do I take this technology and actually deliver it in a way that improves my financial performance or operational performance, and then how do I do that at scale, right? And right now we're still in that sort of pilot. We're learning. Nobody's really figured out how do you scale broadly, but it's going to come. But, you know, so I think the hype is real. I think it's just a matter of time until the business model sort of emerges. As to one of your earlier questions on how does it become much more ubiquitous and used across, it's become sort of second nature like the iPhone. We're just not there yet.
Yeah.
So I agree with everything you said. You know, in the beginning of all this, there were these trillions and trillions of dollars, numbers being thrown around. And then a lot of the excitement was in the sensors. And if you went to the IoT World Forum, 3-4 years ago, that was a big topic, and that's not a topic anymore. The topic now is the application. So, and it takes some time. You got to have something to build an application on. But, as we've been talking about this whole time, it's the whole return on investment that you're going to get, and that's all about the application. So the technology just enables that application to happen. And a lot of the outcome is going to be based on a few things, like changing the way we work. If you don't change the way you work, then you don't save money there. So more automation, more efficiencies, things like that. And then this whole predictive maintenance thing is, I think, it's early. I think it's really going to. We don't know where it's going to go, but it's definitely going to go in a much more valuable direction. Because when you want to do maintenance on something is the day that plant is shut down to do all the other stuff. So if you don't know what to go in and also address, then you may have to come back later, and not only that service call, but if you have to bring a line down to do something that's really not desirable at all. So there's, again, the application, I think, is really what's gonna drive the future for this.
And if I may add one thing, and the other thing I think is we tend to sometimes separate too often the sensor world and the sort of the IoT world from the rest of your data, right? I mean, it's great you can take data off of a piece of equipment and do a predictive insight. We can do that at Uptake. What's really interesting is when you start pulling in your asset management and your work management data and all your ERP data, and you're saying, hey, it's not only going to fail, but here's a diagnostic and here's a recommended action. So when you dispatch the technician, they know what tools to take the first time to fix it, right? And so it's going to be, to build really great applications, it's not just going to be a specific insight on a predictive, it's going to end up being diagnostic, recommended, and then to the degree you can even automate that even better at the edge.
Yeah, and that's actually an example of why I'm not sure where we are in the hype cycle, because there are so many more opportunities as you do something and then you add on to it. We've seen some work with predictive maintenance that we then started to add in work on what parts the customer had in inventory to do exactly what you said. So now when you send the technician, you also can send the parts that they need. That wasn't something that when we started working on it, we'd even imagined. So I think this is a technology that has a lot of potential. We probably won't know all the potential it has until you actually realize it. But you just have to be careful about letting the hype cause you to make a decision that's not supported by a business case. If you always come back to that business case that you've got a solution in place that you will make a good investment return for, you should be in good shape.
I heard a couple times the magic word automation. I am curious, what effect on workforce do you think the industrial internet is going to have? And please feel free to answer that in any way you think it's applicable.
I think like any other technology, it's going to change the workforce. I think some of the things that people do today, they won't have to do tomorrow because a machine or a computer will take care of it for them, and that'll open up their ability to spend more time doing other things. We've seen some of our IoT technology eliminate some data reporting type jobs, but we've also then seen that we've been able to get more analyst type decisions made so that we can kind of shift resources around. So I don't think it's going to eliminate everyone's job. There might be certain jobs that you don't need anymore. Like stock clerk might not be a job in the future, but you might then find something else for that person to do that's going to be more valuable for the organization.
And I would add, I think that it's going to be. I think about it in a number of dimensions. One is just being better able to prioritize the work you need to do is very beneficial, and it doesn't mean you're going to eliminate positions. You're just going to make people more productive and focus on what really matters. I've never been in a plant where there wasn't more work to be done than people, right? And so, but the problem is what work do I prioritize, and let's get that done first. So I think that's going to be there. But I do think in the long term, as the edge devices get smarter, and a lot of these algorithms that we're building now in the cloud get deployed at the machine itself, it may automate fixes in a way that decreases the need for as many people.
You know, we've been using some remote diagnostic capability, and one of the things that it told us is about half the time when we were sending technicians out to fix something, they didn't really need to go. The machine just needed to be reset, and we could now do that remotely. And you know who the person who was most excited about that was? The technicians, right? Because for them, it wasn't like, you know, I drove all the way out there and hit a button and drove back. You know, now I can do that sitting at my desk. Or more importantly, sitting in another job, actually doing something, pull out my smartphone, hit the reset button, and start the machine up again.
If Silicon Valley is the epicenter for internet companies directed at consumers, how likely is it that Chicago can become the geographic center for companies that sell products and services related to the industrial internet?
I mean, my bias, it's ours to lose for a number of reasons. One is we're an industrial city, right? We come out of that. The Midwest is where the industrial folks are, where the big companies are. We should be actually the ones who actually solve the problems in these industries. Two is Chicago in particular, or at least the Midwest, we've got a number of phenomenal schools. And if you look at the number of people coming out of the computer science departments, people coming out of the data science, we have all the raw materials to actually be great in this space, and we should be. I mean, like, I would be really disappointed in 10 years if somehow those arrogant folks out in the valley somehow were to, you know, were to be able to beat us on this. I think this is in our natural sweet spot as a city, as the Midwest, as sort of the roots of who we are. And as Andy Zopp and some people said on the prior panel, we have the people to do the work. Like, we have great data scientists, great developers. We've got all these great universities around here. There is no reason, zero, that we shouldn't be dominating this space.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think industrial Internet of Things will go where the industry is, right? You'll see it in Houston and Dallas and Chicago and Detroit and, you know, Cleveland, because it is fundamentally there to drive better performance on the industry, not just because it's some cool new high tech.
And I think it's hard. I don't think the guys in the valley like hard.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. It's hard because you can't just roll out the technology and be done. You have to show that it's actually going to provide benefit, right? And that makes it much harder.
If you had to actually show something provided benefit, there would be a lot fewer apps in the App Store. Last thing, and I'd like you all to take a stab at this, and then we're going to go to questions from the audience. The title of this panel is IIoT, the big opportunity. What do each of you see as the big opportunity with this technology?
You know, I think from my perspective, the biggest opportunity is for us to get closer to our customers, connecting our supply chain with theirs, sharing our data with them and their data with us so we can make better decisions on product design, on forecasting, on our material purchases, and, you know, frankly, in creating entirely new business models that wouldn't be possible. We have a division that makes a beverage dispensing equipment, and, you know, normally you sell that to a restaurant and then they use it to sell drinks. They've been pioneering a concept where they'll give the piece of equipment to the restaurant for free, which the restaurant likes because it avoids the capital outlay, and then every time they sell a drink, you know, we get a cut. And that's only possible because, you know, we can monitor the machine remotely and see where that unit is and how many drinks it's pouring, so we can measure how much revenue we should be getting.
That's cool.
Two thoughts. One is, at Uptake we say, you know, it's just creating a world that works. So what's exciting to us is machines don't have to fail. Like, you can start getting this data, and historically we've done it on a time base, or let's say you buy a car and they're like, come in every 50,000 miles. What's on average, right? How you drive it, where you drive it, the weather conditions changes everything. And if you can know that type of insight for every car or every piece of machinery, you can actually do preventative in a way that's predictive. And so you shouldn't have failures. I think the really exciting piece, to your point though, the second one is the business models are going to change, right? Like, if Uptake is successful, we commoditize OEMs, right? So I don't care if you have a wind turbine made by Siemens or GE or Vestas, if I can take that data and give you insights without the OEM having to tell you that, then you don't really care which OEM you buy from. So I think there's going to be big changes on the OEM side in terms of what their business model is going to look like.
I'd say probably one of the biggest things that I can think of is well, two things actually. The first would be that it's changing the way we work and will change the way we work. And because of that, we're seeing the opportunity for more jobs to come back to the U.S. It's just, it looks different, right? But it is, and manufacturing coming back to the U.S. In general, I think that it's taking inefficiencies out and waste out of so many areas and so many things so that that waste can be turned into value where everyone benefits. So I think that that's really good.
Yeah. Okay. So we have our first question from the audience. How should automation equipment builders design solutions that operations will use and sell the value of the IoT designs? One more time. How should automation equipment builders design solutions that operations will use and then sell the value of the IoT designs? So we have someone who, it sounds like, is designing automation equipment, and he wants people in operations to like it so that they will buy it. I hope I got that right, whoever you are.
Yeah, so I think a couple things there that I can think of. So the first would be something that is plug and play, easy to use, because now everything is Ethernet IP that's coming out, and so if it's very hard to set up, that's a non-starter these days. And the other thing is you need to be able to trust the manufacturer of that, so that we talked a little in the beginning about this whole cybersecurity risk. So a reputation that something that I bring in and hook up is not gonna cause problems, I think is pretty important as well.
Yeah, I was going to say it. If you have a new piece of equipment, it needs to sort of seamlessly replace the old piece of equipment, right? You shouldn't have to have a lot of hard work to hook it up, figure out how to use it, where the data is going, and what you're going to do with it. That should all sort of be part of the easy-to-explain solution set up front.
How do you stay focused on long-term improvement when these IoT devices are giving you live data continuously?
How do you stay focused on what?
How do you stay focused on long-term improvement when you're constantly getting all this data influx?
Well, I actually think that's one of the opportunities for long-term improvement, is that you got all this data. Now you start figuring out, what it is you can do with it. When you make the push, hey, if I could put a sensor in the brake drum, I could figure out how hot it got, and that would tell me how to design a better one. And then when you start seeing the data real time, you can actually say, hey, do you know that our customer has a truck where the brake drum is ready to explode? All of a sudden that becomes, hey, that's probably a business opportunity there of some way, shape, or the other. So in my mind, that's actually one of the exciting things here, is that all this data allows you to start going into it, seeing what insights you can draw, what business decisions you can enable, and that really changes everything. So in some ways, that access to the data is the big payoff, because then you can start to figure out how to turn that data into value.
Isn't there any danger, though, of drowning from drinking from the fire hose?
Oh, there definitely is, right? So you have to prioritize, right? You can't go after everything at one time, and you don't want to spend a lot of time, spending 3 weeks on this and 3 weeks on something else. You got to actually take some of them through. But having access to that data, you might not use it all today. You might use some of it today and some of it tomorrow. But just having it there creates that real treasure trove of value to go off and mine repeatedly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would just add again, I think we've said it a number of times, the data is a means to an end. And the end is improving outcomes, right? So I'm either improving the number of megawatts my wind turbine's producing, or I'm reducing the cost of operating it, or I'm improving the safety. That's your long-term goal. Then figure out, what data do I need in order to have the insights to be able to do that, right? So you shouldn't be looking, if you're sitting at a screen, it's like the Matrix all day, you're doing something very wrong, right? That is not the purpose of it. And even if you're spending money on what's called data warehouses or data lakes, I call them data swamps, because you just throw your data into somewhere and nobody knows what happens to it, right? Start with what problem are you trying to solve? And I think that's always really hard for people to do internally, to come with the justified business case, to say, if I can improve output by 2%, it means this much money for us. And now I'm going to tell you that if I have these types of insights, if I can predict when this is going to fail, or I can dispatch somebody with the right tools the first time, I can get there to 2%. Then you're like, great, now I'm going to go spend the money. But until you have that, I wouldn't be spending a dime.
I think also what you'll see is that more and more processing is going to be done right at the sensor, which actually reduces the amount of data that you're gonna have to pay attention to. So, but again, that's about cost curve, right? So as the cost curve comes down, and as people learn more things, why push something up to the cloud when you can analyze it right there? And so I think that's going to help too.
Yeah, and can I just add, I mean, that is a huge thing to keep in mind, because you're going to spend a lot of money pushing a lot of data to the cloud, and you're probably not going to use 95% of it. So you got to be really careful about what data you really want to push, because otherwise you're going to spend, Amazon's going to be very happy.
Can you talk about the value of some of the data you've seen from sensors in the field? How much money is saved? I think this person would just really enjoy some, like, you know, concrete examples of what you've seen the technology accomplish in terms of the business case.
I was told there'd be no math.
I'm sorry.
So in the example I mentioned with the ability to reset the machines remotely, that reduced the service budget for one of our customers by almost 50%. So you know they were pretty excited about that.
I'll give you an example from the wind world. Is because we can do predictive analytics now on different major components in a wind turbine. You know, one of the first sites that we rolled out the software to, within 2 days we predicted a main bearing failure. Had it gone catastrophic, which it would have cost $250,000. By sending the technician up tower early, it cost $5,000, right? So one of the questions you had earlier was sort of like, where will this take off? And I think it's got to be where there's a huge opportunity to either make or save money. And so the bigger, the more expensive the equipment, the more expensive downtime is, you're going to see that business case.
Yeah. Is there any legislation regarding data, privacy, who owns the data, and liability concerns that you are currently watching and is of concern to you?
I know we're paying attention to the European data regulations that are just now starting to be enforced. That's causing us to move some data storage locations around to be in compliance.
With the advent of IoT, do you foresee a shift from product information management solutions to master data management? I don't know what that question means. Somebody in the audience does. Okay.
Yes.
I'm going to disagree and say no.
7.
What was it from the Hitchhiker's Guide? 42?
I think that, are there any final remarks or closing thoughts that you have about the industrial internet that you think that interest and fascinate you? What are you most curious about as this technology evolves and unfolds?
I'll open with on that one. So the thing that's most interesting to me is understanding the very, very broad ecosystem that has to all work together to make this successful. You know, so when you think about, as you're starting to consider what am I going to do in IIoT as a company, it's all about the outcome that I'm trying to create. So what Sonny was talking about earlier, and then, but as you're going down, then it's about, okay, that's the outcome. How do I do it? But at some point, this whole ecosystem has to come together. So what I mean by that is the folks who make, so we make the infrastructure, so all the cables, wire management, connectors, things like that, that connects to someone else's thing, that connects to someone else's thing, and so on. So at some point, this all has to get integrated together and work together, and the application has to be driven properly. And so the ecosystem is very broad and wide when you put these solutions together. So that's most interesting to me is how do you coordinate and make that ecosystem come together, because if you don't do it right, you can have a lot of issues.
And for me, there's so many, it's so fascinating, the whole area, right? Because it's so new, and if you're excited about that and you're willing to sort of ride the wave, it can be really exciting. The really interesting thing to me, though, is what business model is going to emerge, right? So if you go back 20 years ago with the internet, you're like, oh, Barnes & Noble is like, great, I'll set up a website, and I'll actually have a competitive advantage, because if you want to drop off the book at the store, that's better for me. And it didn't work, right? Or Amazon, you were like, it's a transparency game, it's going to be a race to the bottom, they're never going to scale. So fundamentally, iTunes emerged. Something different is going to emerge here. We have a way that we buy and use and operate big, massive capital equipment today. I don't think it's going to look the same in 10 years. I don't know what it looks like, but sort of like what you're seeing with cars, with regard to Uber or all these other things, you may not have to buy a lot of capital equipment to do the work you need to do. So to me, the business model change is going to be, I think it's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, I would echo the point about the business model is really interesting. All kinds of new opportunities being created by the connectivity you get, the data that you get. And the other thing that interests me, maybe more just on a personal note, is all the exciting ways that you can measure odd things. And that's just kind of neat. We look at some technology that we put a fiber optic cable in the electrical line that they run the power current through, and it can actually now measure when the branches on trees get too close to it, so you notice send the tree trimmer out in advance, right? And that's just like, oh, that's kind of cool. And things like that you never would have thought of before, but have the access to the data becomes a way to really transform how the world operates.
And on that note, thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you to all of you. And